All right, as people are filling in, we ask that you please just take a minute, get cozy. It is the lunch hour, so we do encourage getting some lunch, maybe top up that coffee, get some water, do what you need to do. And as we're waiting for everybody to fill in, we'll just, we'll get started in a few moments. So thanks so much for coming. This is so exciting. I'm sorry, I just couldn't help. I know I was.
I'm clapping and cheering.
It's infectious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rami's clapping in the background. I feel it, Rami. All right. So I'm feeling like at the rate that participants are coming in, we can get started at around like 12:03. So 2 minutes from now. Yep, we can get started. And as they hop on, which is perfect. For anyone who is just getting on the call, and I'm gonna just keep saying this until we get as many people as possible. We are waiting for everybody to fill in. So please feel free to get a drink, get some food, get comfortable before we get started in a couple minutes. All right. Okay. All right, folks, we'll get started in just one more minute. Thanks, Amy. All right. I feel like this is the longest minute of my entire life. I'm just.
What is time though?
Right.
Could be a year, could be a minute. Yeah.
Really? All right, folks, we are gonna get started. As people come in, we'll just keep moving. It'll be great. But we will start with an introduction. So welcome everyone to the Great Minds, Brave Spaces speaker series. My name is Christelle Hales. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm so happy that you are all here. The Great Minds, Brave Spaces speaker series is dedicated to working towards infusing themes of diversity, equity, and inclusion into our daily conversations and thought processes. Every session, we bring a speaker to share their expertise on DEI. As you already know, the Great Minds, Brave Spaces speaker series is now completely virtual for the indefinite future, which means that Rami and I are working twice as hard to bring you engaging and interactive DEI speakers and content. Podcasts, cooking classes, dance workshops, makeup tutorials, medical patient advocacy guides, and so much more. We are so excited to virtually bring you all the ways DEI impacts every fiber of our lives and brings us closer together as a community. We'll get started in just a moment, but before we dive in, there are a couple of things worth knowing. One, every Great Minds, Brave Spaces session is available via WPI YouTube playlist. If you ever find that you have a spare moment and just want to listen to some quality DEI content, that's the place to go. I will leave the link in the chat for those who would like to check it out. We are also working to get the Great Minds, Brave Spaces to as many people as possible. So we ask that you share with your friends, your colleagues, your dog, your cousins, everybody. It's for everyone, truly. Second, to kick off Women's Heritage Month next week, we've collaborated with OMA to host a Women's Heritage Month dialogue featuring Disha Dyer, founder and CEO of Hook and Fasten, and former social secretary for the Obama administration. During this dialogue, Disha will discuss the importance of perseverance for women in leadership. There will be more events about women in leadership as part of our upcoming Women's Heritage Month programs. Stay tuned and be sure to sign up for the DEI listserv if you have not already done so, so you can stay up to date on all the wonderful events coming out of our offices. During the Q&A portion for today, attendees can either type their questions in the Q&A chat function below, or they can message me or Rami privately via Zoom and get to turn on their cameras and mic to join Lesley and Michaiah on the screen to ask questions, a little bit more of a personal touch. It's your decision. So the two choices are you can either ask a question in the chat function and I ask on your behalf, or you can or you can message myself or Rami personally, and we can upgrade you to panelists, and you can join Michaiah and Lesley on the screen. Very exciting. Lastly, Rami and I want to continue to provide the WPI community with engaging and thought-provoking DEI programs, initiatives, and content. Help us to continue bring the topics and speakers that matter most to you by filling out the DEI survey today. If you missed all that, no worries. I'll post all the links at the beginning and the end of the session, so don't even worry about it. Now, without further ado, I'd like to present our dynamic duo, WPI's very own student development and counseling counselor, Lesley McGee, alongside Michaiah Dominguez, mental health counselor and relationship coach of Michaiah Life Services. Let's give them both a WPI virtual welcome.
So just to jump into this, first, Michaiah, please tell us your story about sort of finding and choosing this path, like what draws you to therapy and what helps you to continue to do it. I think especially in the context of like, it's very hard to find a Black female therapist these days, right? Like, let's acknowledge that. So.
Absolutely. So first, let me just say thank you so much for having me as a part of this discussion. I think it's really important to highlight the need for mental health services and to really bring some attention to what this means in the context of our day-to-day lives. Before I answer any of the questions, because I am the clinician I just want to take about 40 seconds for everyone to be able to clear their mental plate. So what we often do, right, is hop from meeting to meeting, discussion to discussion, task to task, and we're not fully present in any of the moments that we're actually in. So what I'd like to do, I know some of you may be eating and that's absolutely okay, but if you have an app running, social media in particular, if you have some emails you're responding to, if you have anything that you're anticipating for after this discussion, I want to take just a few seconds to ground ourselves in this space so that we can all be present, right? I've gotten off of client calls before this. I'm headed in to see some more clients after this, but I want to be fully engaged with you, and I'm requesting and welcoming you to do the same thing. So just for about maybe even 30 seconds, right, to close those tabs that we have open of processing things that have happened before and anticipating anything that's to come afterwards, but to just be engaged and fully present. So let's just take a moment to put everything down, to breathe and be silent. Thank you so very much. So now that we're all here, we're all anchored in this moment, I am looking forward to telling you a little bit about how I got into this in the first place. So this is a very personal story for me and for most therapists that enter this field. My father is my first case study. So he, being a juvenile delinquent, being a formerly incarcerated person, being someone who struggled with substance abuse in his youth, a veteran of Vietnam War, and then becoming somehow a holder of multiple master's degrees, being a superior educator, musician, an artist, a husband, a father. And I wondered, how exactly is a person able to transform? What is the secret sauce? What's the ingredient that allows someone to be able to identify the change that they want to make, to be courageous enough to follow through on making those changes, making the decisions and taking the steps necessary to transform, mature, and grow in the area that they've determined is necessary, and then being able to maintain that over time? What exactly is it? What resources are needed? What support and encouragement is needed? What accountability is needed, especially in the fields of substance abuse recovery, chronic homelessness, prison reentry, right? Those often marginalized populations. What does it take? But moreover, right, those are themes that cross over into all of our lives. When we notice behavioral patterns in interpersonal relationships, whether it's a dynamic with our family members or friends, a marriage that we want to turn around, our dating patterns, our work habits, right? How do we identify a problem, be able to follow through with action, and then maintain that change? So that's what I became really curious in finding out. And there's two really important things that I noticed along that way. So I noticed intersectionality, right? There's a social justice piece to this where our ethnicity, our cultural identity, immigration status, socioeconomic status, all of those things play a really major role in being able to identify and predict mental health concerns that could develop over time into adulthood. And so we're looking at discrimination. We had to look at marginalization. We had to look at people being overdiagnosed, right? Certain communities being overdiagnosed, overly medicated, being imprisoned as opposed to being treated, right? All of those things are so super important. So that's one of the answers that I came up with, is being able to look at the significant impacts that are going to influence our mental health or influence or impact mental illness, right? And then the second really important piece of information that I found out was this concept of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, right? And so this is compounded issues that occur during childhood that have both mental health and physical health implications in adulthood. This includes things that we overlook, like poverty, right? The financial uncertainty growing up in poverty can lead to mental health and physical health outcomes that are less than desirable. We're also, taking a look at witnessing or being victim to domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, which are all things that my father had contact with. And so in studying these ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, which most of the research had been done in collaboration with the CDC, that the outcomes are lack of attention in childhood and school, right? There's actually a change in your brain development, in being able to make decisions, in being able to learn and having responses to stress, alcoholism, smoking, right? And then the physical health outcomes, obesity, stroke, heart disease, cancer, right? All of these things. And so what I got into the field to do was to be able to give some attention to folks who need to understand, well, why am I this way, right? Why do I have so much difficulty? It may be because of this intersectionality that we were talking about, or it may be because of some adverse childhood experiences. What can I do to be able to help and support people who have already experienced this? But most importantly, how can I proactively be an agent of change to address these social issues?
Yeah, so you said curiosity, which is the word that was coming up for me as you were speaking, but you described this also beautifully. And I'm really, it feels like with your personal experience, right, and seeing your dad with, all the things he had to go through, right? It's like you see these, these statistics, right? Or it's like your health is impacted, right? Like all these things can mean bad stuff. And yet there's also a way in which people can thrive. People can come back from that. People can
Absolutely.
Turn it around, right? Like there is hope when attention is given, when people are curious about those experiences and ways to rehabilitate rather than just like punish, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it also feeds into this idea of, like we say, marginalized a lot, but what does that look like in mental health? And it really just means like ignored, right? Like people are just kind of like dismissed as, there's kind of no hope. Yeah, it's like, let's not think about these people, or, like, what are you going to do? But it's, then there's people like you saying there are things we can do actually, right? If we just kind of have some hope and look inside, right? So
Absolutely.
Also, you're making me think about the system, which I think is kind of part of the topic today, right? And so, especially these days with so many things being virtual, and the fact that in your work, you've done a really beautiful job of building sort of a mental health community through TikTok and other social medias, which I think is a growing trend, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of goes against this model of like typical mental health, or how the mental health system has been for a very long time, of kind of like insurance and like ongoing psychodynamic therapy for weeks and weeks and weeks, kind of ongoing forever. So knowing like what brings you into this and how you've been able to sort of do your work in kind of a different way. Can you just speak to that and how sort of like these other systems outside of like the typical system, like what are the strengths and limitations of sort of doing the work that way?
Right. You bring up some really excellent points about this biomedical model that we as clinicians ascribe to. Mainly, it is to diagnose and to prescribe, right? And it doesn't take
Fix
into
a problem.
account.
Yeah.
That is highly problematic because it doesn't take into account the social context. It doesn't give honor to people's personal experiences, their identity, and their life roles as they have been able to self-conceptualize. So it's really important for me as a clinician of color to raise some awareness about what mental health could be, right? The potential in being able to honor and acknowledge people's lived experiences, to take all of that social context and make some sense of it by being multiculturally informed, by being trauma informed, and by leading with this key word, curiosity about how do you define yourself? How do you see yourself as a part of your community? What are your strengths? What are your limitations? And how are we going to create an atmosphere where trust is built, where vulnerability is possible, and where healing can take place, right? Where there is a space for you to feel validated, which really means that I'm just seen and heard and not dismissed as a case number, as a patient
List of
ID,
symptoms or something.
right?
Yeah.
As a list of symptoms so that we can prescribe and move you along. So the system, this this medical model is really to like get you in and get you out. And then if you are not recovered, if you are not helped, then yes, it is criminalized in a way, especially in communities of color. So my efforts on social media is to raise awareness by arming people with information about destigmatizing mental health services, right? Destigmatizing therapy, that there are clinicians who look like you, where you can be understood, heard, feel humanized, right? And really be have that compassionate space where the pretense of being strong, the pretense of being perfect, having to guard your tongue, right? Girdle what you say, that all of that could be diminished greatly because we're able to establish some rapport. I wanted to also bring to attention that, let's see, the other benefit is that with the destigmatizing of the services, it's really important to target communities of color through social media because although 20%, we are 20% more likely to report psychological distress, we are less likely to seek out support. One of the reasons is because there is a distrust in the systems that provide the support. So by me showing up, giving information, maintaining professionalism, but doing so in a way and sharing information in a way that's digestible, then I'm normalizing it and allowing the communities of color to be disarmed so that we can go into helping scenarios where we can seek support. And this is information that was publicized by the American Counseling Association, right, through their publication Counseling Today. But yes, there's apprehension because there's a fear of being misdiagnosed. There of course, because of institutionalized racism, right? Systemic racism, stigma, mainly to do with like spiritual formation and this idea that you cannot be spiritual and also seek mental health services, which is another layer of this idea that we cannot seek support. And then there are financial constraints and a lack of access.
Yes.
A lack
It's
of
not free.
access.
None of
It
it's
is
free.
not free. And then where it is free, right, where Medicaid or other health insurances are covering, it's usually through a clinic setting where, again, we're quickly seeing patients, we're quickly diagnosing, quickly medicating, and it's not actually providing the support that is needed. So
or even quickly, it's like after months and months of wait list. Yeah.
right. Absolutely. And then once you get in the door, there's this, okay, so I need to discover as much as possible about you. I'm going to slap
20
on a
minutes.
diagnosis because I have to, in order to get paid
Yes.
through the insurance company, you have to have a label for me
Right.
to be able to continue seeing you. So the whole system is set up in a way that we're not allowing clients to be set up for success, but instead for diagnosis and possible medication. So showing up on social media is important for me because I am disarming this idea that mental health clinicians are going to harm you. I am removing the questions of what could therapy look like, because quite often it looks just like this, right? A conversation between two people, sharing, asking questions, leading with
Grounding.
curiosity,
Yes.
grounding, right? It's not what we see in movies where
Thank
there's
God
someone
it's not.
with the whiteboard and, we're just
Yeah.
silent and the whole time you're talking. There's so many more methods to care. And so when I show up and I bring the fullness of who I am, right? My personality, the way I talk, where I'm from, the influences of my father, of my mother, of my personal life, right? I bring all of that into the space with me so that, oh, wow, I can actually relate. I can understand. I can be myself and I can remove this guard that I have. But unfortunately, the limitation of social media is that mental health counseling is not a one size fit all. So depending on your concerns, your symptoms, your issues, your possible
Context.
diagnoses, context, your age, right? Your sexual
reading level.
expressions, right?
Yeah.
All of these things.
Level of education. Yeah.
It matters.
Yes.
And so when we are searching for a social worker or a mental health counselor or a psychiatrist on a social media platform and don't have that understanding that this might or might not work for you according to what you're actually experiencing, we could be doing more harm than good if we're not giving those directives, if we're not informing folks, hey, this might not be for you. I'm speaking specifically to those who are experiencing this symptom versus that.
Right. Or even because I think part of how you're presenting yourself speaks to cutting into the power differential of the therapist or helper person as above and knows everything, right? It's just another human who's had some training, right? But this idea of take as much as what resonates and you can leave the rest of it, right?
Discard
My
the
word
rest.
is not law. Yeah.
Right.
You are the decider of what fits or doesn't fit, and that can change over time, and that's okay and that's normal, right?
Right. And so it does put the client in the power seat because you are able to figure out, okay, I am the expert of my life. And although this professional knows best practices, some of these best practices are not going to be best for me. So the way I like to explain it to clients is that these interventions or recommendations that I have are like a garment. We try them on. We see if it fits, right? How does it feel when you're in this garment? And if it does not work, let's take it off and we'll experiment with something new. But we're learning together and growing together. And really, you are the expert of your life, not me. And I think that is so empowering. And that's an important piece of person-centered therapy, right? To be able to say, no, I'm not the expert here. I have education, I have
training.
information, I have training, right? But you are the expert.
You fill in the details.
Let's do this as it's self-directed by the client, right? It's intrinsic focus on the client. And then I'm there to walk alongside you, not to be an authoritative figure and tell you what to do.
You're not doing, which is kind of goes with the medical model a little bit. I can see that dynamic play out with some doctors and and that, it's a different context, right? I think the other piece you're touching on is the strengths-based thing, right? Of not just coming as a set of symptoms, but first of all, your social media arms people with the language to describe what's going on for them, because that's oftentimes a barrier in itself. How do I put this into words? But but then exploring okay, I've made it this far, right? There's inherent resilience too, right? That the medical model often misses, right? In terms of thinking about, you haven't exploded yet. And even if something has exploded, you still got through it, right? Let's talk about that and factor that in, right? And think about what you already are doing or how you already are in tune with kind of what's going on inside. Again, even if you weren't talking to a clinical social worker for months and months and months, right? Like there's a lot of work that we all just do just by nature of being ourselves, living our lives, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Tap into what works, what has worked.
And there's always something, right?
Absolutely.
I also want to kind of dig into this idea because it sounds like this is just your jam, is like, what are other ways to sort of empower people should they decide to start this journey, or if they're in the middle of the journey, right? Like in terms of like things that I can think of are, you know, finding the right fit of therapists, right? Holistic options, the idea of things getting worse before they get better, e.g. like feeling more, right? Getting more in touch with the stuff that brought you in and being like, does this mean I'm getting worse? Or
Right.
whatever you want to talk about. But yeah, just like enlighten us on that process and as you've seen it.
So I definitely like to share this fun fact with folks who are looking to get into therapeutic services, is that the relationship matters most. The way you vibe with someone, right, with a clinician is more important than their degree. It's more important than their approach, right? Whether they've been trained in, you know, one model versus the other. Really, the connection is what matters. That's where the magic happens in the therapeutic relationship. So as you're searching for someone who is going to support you, keep that in mind, right? Trust your instinct, trust your inner voice, right? With how you feel, if you feel connected or disconnected, if you feel heard or seen, or if you feel dismissed. Those things are going to matter more than what a person's training is. So that is one of the ways that you can steer yourself in the right direction when selecting a provider. And just as we said before, right, you're in the power seat. So with any medical intervention, mental health included in that, you get to choose, right? You're not stuck with any PCP, you're not stuck with any GYN, you're not stuck with any specialist. You get to choose. And that includes a clinician, a behavioral health specialist. You get to scout someone out who is going to be a good fit for you. Being trained, being qualified does not mean that I'm a good fit for you. And so you get to decide. And you get to feel that out, mainly in how you feel. Is there, do you see that there can be rapport built with this person? Can you open up to them? Can you trust them, right? To share some of your innermost thoughts. Is this a space of safety? And so you decide that. Secondly, I would suggest that you align the services to your values. Right? It's a Google search away to be able to find someone who has a holistic approach, for example, that might incorporate nature walks, that might incorporate Reiki, that might incorporate biblical principles, right? You can really narrow it down to be able to allow the services to be in alignment with what you value most in your personal life. You can also find, like, search for a multiculturally informed therapist. You can search for someone who is affirming of the LGBTQIA spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Close. I think I got all the letters. I don't know. But you need to find someone who's going to affirm your identity and understand, lead with compassion, or at least be willing to learn. And we take this for granted in New York because we have so much access to meeting different people. And we're constantly, you know, talking about different identities all across the board. But in other states, right, this is not something that they're used to. So you need to find, if any of you are from another state, if you have family in another state that they're also looking for therapeutic services, please be sure to find someone who, if they have not been exposed to different communities or different perspectives, that they are at least willing to be open to learning about who you are and leading with compassion and curiosity.
Yes. And I want to underscore that the first point that you made about that, the vibe, right? That's actually, there's a lot of research about that being the biggest predictor of success in therapy, is the quality of the relationship between the two people. So absolutely, cannot emphasize that enough. So you're full of such wisdom.
And as far as I didn't answer the question, as far as, like, you know, the feeling of being worse initially before you get better. Yes. I like to call that a vulnerability hangover.
Yes. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, where you open up and you explore all of these concepts, answer all of these questions that perhaps you hadn't ever disclosed to anyone before. You may be left with this lingering feeling that I've said too much. I'm worried about how they're going to perceive me. What are they going to think about me? And then also, as you said, like opening the door really to Pandora's box. Like now I have to face all of these feelings that perhaps I had been suppressing, denying, running from, right? And so now for the first time, I actually have to take a look in the mirror and really face my feelings and feel them. Feel the feelings so that I can face them, so that I can heal them, so I can process them and navigate successfully through them.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is a natural part of the process, and it is okay, right? To feel, to question, am I really on the right track? What am I doing? But yes, there is some unsettling when we're taking a new look.
Yes. And again, this could be with a therapist. This could be like reading self-help books or like doing other just sort of inward work. Initially kind of stirs things up again, maybe that you had been distracted, self-medicating, whatever. So realizing that growing and healing can look like feeling more, right? And being more in touch with the whole spectrum of feelings, right? Because good mental health is not about, I never feel anxiety and like, I'm always happy, right? That usually means distraction or like, honestly,
denial.
Drugs. Denial and drugs. The other piece I really want to quickly touch back on too of the finding a therapist fit, because that is, I think, so important. I think this isn't, I don't know how like widely known this is, but I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I have to keep meeting with this person. You can always change your mind. You can feel like someone's a good fit and then be like, know what? No, I don't like this, right? And it's fully within your right to just dip, and also know on the other side of it, it happens to therapists all the time. And it's like, we want, a good therapist on their best day will be like, we want people to find who works best for them to get the help they need. And if it's not me, then that's okay, right? We can sort of move on for that. So just illuminating that a little bit. But,
yes, thank you.
Another piece I want to dig into, because I do hear about this on social media. I'm not really on social media, but it seems like trauma is a growing trend. And I have feelings about right now, we're in a trauma, right? So what do you think about the fact that so many Americans are speaking about this last year or 4 years or all the years before that as a traumatic experience? And just what do you predict as we like guess about the future being the fallout as we shift out of this full quarantine at some point on people's mental health?
Well, I want to give some information just about what trauma is and what it is not. And with most buzzworthy terms, there is this lack of understanding of the clinical definition of a word, right? So we hear some hot topics like narcissism, right? And trauma ADHD, and ADHD. All of ADHD, OCD, right? We see it commonly misused in movies or referenced on social media, in articles, right? In pop culture, magazines, all these things kind of misinterpret what these terms actually mean. And so I want to give you guys just some info about how the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, right, the DSM, that's like the Bible for clinicians, right, how we define trauma and what we're looking at when we're treating trauma. So I'm going to refer to my notes because I want to make sure I'm communicating this like by the book. But it's an emotional response to a terrible event, right? And there's a sense of overwhelm that is caused by that event and that's been physically or emotionally threatening. So there is a physical or emotional threatening situation, and you have had overwhelm because of it. And what this means is that the distress is exceeding your ability to cope and to have normal functioning as you define normal, right? So it has shifted your ability to function, to show up, to think clearly with your life roles and responsibilities. Right. So there are a few different types of trauma, and I'm going to give some examples. These are like the most commonly known types of trauma. The first is acute. Acute trauma is from one incident, right? So there is one event that has produced this sense of overwhelm, right? And so that could be trigger warning. If anyone has experienced trauma, right, I'm going to get into some details about examples. So if
Feel free to float away and stop listening. Yeah.
Right.
It's
It's all right. Right.
Yeah.
If you start to have some feelings about the list of things that I'm going to go through, because you may have experienced this, right? I'm not ignorant to that. So I am going to go through these pretty quickly, but I'm sensitive to the fact that some of you may have actually experienced these things. So acute trauma is one event, such as a car accident, right? A life-threatening car accident. It could have also been something like being robbed, right? Being robbed in a violent way. It could also include sexual assault, right? So very often we'll see that there is this residue that follows, right? The sense of overwhelm, the inability to cope or navigate interpersonal relationships, or your like emotional stability has been impacted by this one life-altering event. That's acute trauma. The next, one of the more popular ones is chronic trauma. And that's some of what we're seeing right now, where there's a series of prolonged events. So that can include, again, we're talking about poverty. That could include financial crises. That could include job uncertainty. That could include
food insecurity.
Food insecurity, absolutely. This could include the fear of being detained, the fear of being arrested, ICE, for example, right? So we're talking about the
living in fear, constantly.
living in constant fear, and that
Having-
hypervigilance.
Yes,
that
having that
comes
system
along
going
with it.
all the time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The shoe could drop today, tomorrow, the next minute.
Right.
Yeah.
And for a prolonged period of time, that's going to have not just mental health implications, but physical health implications.
Yeah.
Yes, because the hormones that are produced with this fight or flight response
Or freeze.
is going to
freeze. Yes.
Or fawn, right? Like there's so
yeah.
many, but it's producing this hormone in your body that's actually causing you to have increased heart rate, palpitations, migraines, backaches, right? All of
Can't
these
sleep,
like,
trouble
chronic,
sleeping. Yes.
chronic health issues, right? So this is something that we have to be aware of, right? So there's the acute, again, just to recap, that's the one singular traumatic event. Then we have chronic, this series of prolonged events. And then to further that, there's complex trauma, where not only is it a series of prolonged events, but it's exposure to multiple events within that. And that's what I'm seeing with my clients, of an increase in complex trauma, because not only is there, a quarantine, not only is it a pandemic, right? This is affecting everyone worldwide, right, on a daily basis. And we're coming up on the quarantine anniversary, right, here in the United States. 1 year is coming up of how our lives have been drastically changed. And so when we're dealing with this now for a prolonged period of time, there has also been an administration, right, in place in the White House that has caused a series of uncertainties when it comes to all of these like socio-political issues.
Yeah. Let's laugh.
We've been through quite a lot in a year, right? And so all of these things compounded upon one another is leading me to see more cases in this complex trauma. So when we're looking at the like what happens, right? What happens when you experience a traumatic event or a series of them? We have the emotional and psychological responses like denial, right? Confusion, depression, anxiety, irritability, sometimes numbness, right?
Definitely,
A dissociation from reality. And guilt, and the list goes on and on. But there are also physical manifestations of a trauma response. So you could be fatigued. You might find yourself with headaches and migraines, feeling restless, and this sense of hyperarousal because of these hormones that are being secreted that are telling us to fight or flight.
Right. And it can be delayed too. That's the other piece.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yes.
The timeline of it too can be confusing. Yeah. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. But the hope in this, although there has been an increase in what I'm seeing in my caseload and with my clients and with people that I've been able to do, present workshops with and so on, is that although post-traumatic stress is an outcome.
Yeah.
Post-traumatic,
It can be.
it can be.
Yeah.
Post-traumatic resilience is also an outcome, right? So instilling hope, presenting information, making sure that we're engaging people with proper care, sometimes medication, right? But doing them collaboratively, giving people the clinicians that are going to actually help to support them, right? Having the use of personal time on the job, right? All of these
Accommodations,
things,
yes. Yep.
accommodations, all of those are going to lead to being able to instill hope and to be able to be resilient through this and experience growth through this. And really, we've seen this, right? In the workplace, we've seen it in schools, we've seen it with mental health clinicians, that we're adjusting, becoming more flexible and creating new ways of being, new ways to produce, new ways to create the outcomes that we need to still meet and the responsibilities that we still need to attend to, but having that flexibility and that creativity, that's a part of that trauma resilience.
Right. Which is, I'm like, if anyone's in charge of like internet conversation, like putting post-traumatic growth out there, because I don't think that's as big of a phrase, but that's a huge part of it, is like
Yes.
the meaning when people get there, like finding the meaning and seeing how much strength you have through that. It's so powerful. So yeah, when I work with people, it's like, it can be a superpower to know that I've come back from literally, you know what I mean? Like I've come back from this. What is this other thing going to do? You know, in some ways it kind of makes it can make you untouchable. So that's really
Absolutely.
powerful. Yeah. One last question before we kind of open it up to everyone, but I'm wondering other like predictions, because I think everyone's just thinking about like, what's going to happen after this? Yeah. How do you see the system kind of looking when COVID is done? Like, is it going to be fundamentally rebuilt in some ways, or maybe even just for you or how you see your work? Because it's hard to speak about everything everywhere, right? Like, we know
Right,
things are different. Yeah, things are different for different people who have different resources. But what are some ways that you hope maybe to see it be rebuilt or not?
Well, research so far has shown that virtual therapy sessions are just as effective as in person. So that's really great news that we can actually continue to do that. And it's been really helpful in a number of ways to conduct virtual sessions. Right? For those of you who don't know, right, there is a level of care that's given where we do video, just like a Zoom call, right, where it's encrypted for your security, just like your files online at your PCP office, right? So there are protections available to you through certain apps, and it is encrypted for your online security. So we have these face-to-face sessions, and what we're finding is that people are able to talk about the things closest to their hearts in a place where they are most comfortable. So we're finding clients are having sessions in their bed, that you're in your bedroom, you're on your couch, right? And what a better way to be able to remove our defenses when we're in a place of our comfort and we know that we are safe emotionally, physically, right? That we have this level of safety already. And although we might think of the screen as being a barrier, the screen is actually like a protective layer that's allowing folks to be more vulnerable more quickly, because it doesn't feel as intimate. So I'm just going to reveal everything that I need to share, right? I'm okay with being like emotionally naked and on this screen.
It feels like there's distance. Yeah.
It feels like there's distance, and it's protective.
Yes.
Whereas in person, it may take a longer time to develop that rapport and a longer time to allow those defenses to be lowered, because it's a little more intimidating.
Yeah. You're like, I'm in your office. Yeah.
Right. It's a little more intimidating to be in the presence of someone and to feel more vulnerable and more afraid of that vulnerability. So the screen is providing us a great way to be in touch with folks and to really allow for some heavy discussion. Like powerful dynamic sessions have happened virtually between myself and my clients. Phone calls are a close second. So research is telling us, like, phone calls aren't as powerful. There's something about being able to see someone's face, being able to see expressions, being able to share a sentiment, to feel that compassion, even through the screen, it is possible. So the phone calls are a close second because we don't have that visibility, but we're still able to pick up on, the nuances of how someone is speaking, the cadence of their voice, tone, and all of that.
It's like, oh, is that a choke up? Did you just get choked up? Yeah. It requires like deeper listening to that level, like on the phone with someone. Yeah,
absolutely. There's some drawbacks to that too, though, like as a clinician, because we do need to be able to see someone's affect. Right. There are some things that you can cover up and you can hide about your emotional disposition if you're on the phone. Whereas if I'm looking eye to eye, if I'm watching your body language, there are certain things that I would be able to understand and to pick up if we're doing a session virtually as opposed to the phone conversation. So that's one of the reasons it's less effective, because we're able to hide. We're able to be dishonest about, what exactly it is that we're experiencing, symptoms that we're facing. So I'm hoping, all of that to say, I'm hoping that virtual sessions continue because it is effective. It is providing people with this safety net. And furthermore, where there is a lack of access, we're able to provide access. So the way our licensures are set up, we're only licensed per state. But as you can imagine, from city to city, access to mental health counseling is going to be different, right? Based on taxes and all of the things that we allow in our budget for behavioral health. So in the states where there are these deserts of people not being able to access healthcare, including mental health services, the virtual sessions are providing a space where I can meet with you because you're in the state, so you're qualified to provide me services, but I can't travel 2 hours away across town to meet with you. So it's providing this bridge to care where there are deserts for supportive services, where now I can have help. I can have the help I need. And I have an array of people to choose from within my state, because now I don't have to travel to their offices. I don't have to account for that travel time, whether I have a car or not. Right now, I get to just make this appointment. If I'm home, I get to pick up and begin the session. I don't have to worry about babysitting. I don't have to worry about, the travel costs, right? All of those accommodations that I may not have been able to commit to. Now I'm able to get the support I need in the comfort of my home with a qualified professional of my choosing. So it's really empowered clients, and I'm hoping that it continues.
Yeah, and the other thing that's sort of changing, so Michaiah touched on how, licensures by state, but with this sudden shift into like telehealth being kind of the norm, a lot of states are shifting that too. So even in the next couple months, that might shift, which I think even opens more doors, right? So maybe you find someone who's in another state who you want to work with, and like now you're able to, because like governments are starting to recognize that and accommodate for that, because portability is kind of an issue, it's
right. And that's really important. It lends back to what we were speaking about earlier, where, some things we take for granted in New York, with having access to professionals who are aware and exposed to many different lifestyles. And if you're in Wisconsin, for example, right, if you're a person of color in Wisconsin or Iowa, or, some remote area, you may not ever see a clinician of color. And you may not ever feel validated or humanized, and may constantly feel dismissed because people just don't understand you, right? Because you are different. And so opening up the borders, right, so to speak, would allow people the opportunity to connect with a therapist who they feel comfortable with, which research suggests most often is in having a relationship with a clinician who looks like you. And it is not common, right? Less than 10% of clinicians, right? That includes psychiatrists, that includes mental health counselors, that includes social workers, right? So all behavioral health folks, mental health folks, as an umbrella term, less than 10% of people are colored. That includes Latine community, that includes Asian community, that includes African American, Caribbean American, right? That includes all of us. Yeah. Less than 10% of clinicians are people of color.
Yeah.
So
Whole other issue.
allowing virtual sessions are going to allow folks to get the support they need in a normalized way from people from their communities that have a level of understanding where their voice is honored and where they can be seen.
Yes. And I'm aware let's leave some time for questions. Thank you for that. Yes, Christelle.
Hello. I know I said I was going to stay in the background, but I just had to come on because
Yeah.
this was so amazing that there were so many topics that we hit, that there are so many questions, and I just wanted to make sure that we hit all of them, because there are some of them that can be condensed, and I'm going to condense them, and there are some that I think will just take some time. And I just want, there were also some that I really connected with, especially when it came to, and it seems the number one question is, do you have any tips or guidance in terms of finding a therapist of color, or someone that, it doesn't always have to be of color, but that's a great place to start, right? Finding a therapist of color, especially in areas kind of frankly like Massachusetts, where there isn't
Worcester,
especially, that doesn't have a ton of therapists of color. And Google search isn't always the best way, right? There's like, what is it, psychology.com kind of has this reservoir, and exactly, like, it's not necessarily where we want to get started. And before you answer, I wanted to mention that my own personal experience finding a therapist was hell. Like, I joke and say that it was like dating. It's very much like dating. A ton of apps out there, right? There are a ton of apps and resources out there like, hey, we have what you need. Most of them don't actually have what you need. And they're just, out there for a quick buck, right? Because mental health is sensationalized, as, capitalism works well on its own, right? And so, and when I met with like the first few therapists that I reached out to that I thought were cool, they were not taking clients. The wait list was forever. And when I did meet with them, it wasn't a vibe. Like, the energy was not there. And so I had to start again from, like, it's very much something that you have to put a lot of work into. And I don't think people realize that, but also it's a number one barrier to why people don't necessarily get help, because it almost feels like a second job if you're really intentionally looking for a therapist. So, long story short, do you have any resources to guidance or tips to make these resources a little bit less, from hell? And also, someone wants to know if you, Michaiah, are taking on any clients and how we can refer you out if you want to share like your social media or anything like that.
Okay, so I have a few answers. The easiest is that you're right. I mean, a Google search for, a therapist in my area, right? That's going to be difficult. However, Google is a great tool if you are aware that there's this trend of directories for clinicians of color. So if you are going to use Google, search for a directory of therapists in whatever it is that you're looking for. So there are directories for Latina therapists. There are directories for anything really, for multiculturally diverse clinicians. There's therapy for blackgirls.com. There's, for anything you could think of, it seems that there are directories being created. And what a directory is, right, is just like old school, like a phone book, right? You're going to find the name, the location, and the specialties of different clinicians. So you could search by area, you could search by their specialty, their training, or you could search by cultural affiliation, sexual orientation, right? Anything. Gender identity, right? It's all available. So we can use Google a little bit smarter, right? As far as if we know that directories are available. So although Google directly won't be a great help, if you're searching for directories, that's a great start. Additionally, if you have a physician, a primary care physician that has a behavioral health specialist in the office, you can start there, right? Your insurance is going to cover it. It's a nice like baby step in the right direction. So what it's going to do, the collaborative care model, that's what I do as like my daytime gig, right? The collaborative care model allows you to speak to a clinician for a half an hour every 2 weeks. as opposed to a more like traditional one-on-one approach, which is a therapy weekly for an hour. But it's a great segue. It's good to get your feet wet, get comfortable with speaking to someone. Usually there's only one behavioral health specialist there. But what they are charged to do, their task is to bridge you to a higher level of care. Right. So they're going to secure 3 referrals for you so that you'll be able to just call these people, email these people, and then be able to scout from there. So their job is to make sure that these clinicians take your insurance. Their job is also to make sure that they're accepting new clients. So that work has been wiped off of your to-do list, right? And this person, as a part of the collaborative care model, is going to take care of that for you. But in the meantime, while you wait, right, you get to talk to someone at least bi-weekly for a half an hour each session, and your insurance covers it. So those are 2 ways that I would highly suggest. And of course, social media, right? Use popular hashtags, Black Therapists Rock, whatever it is that you're looking for, right? Search the hashtags and see what pops up in your area. And also asking family and friends. You never know who's seeing a therapist until you actually bring it up. You might actually find out that a lot more of your loved ones are seeking out care, and they may have a recommendation for you. As far as, am I taking credits? I am booked and busy, right? so a lot of therapists, especially now, because of the raised concerns with the quarantine, because of financial instability, because of uncertainty, because of all these heightened experiences, a lot of us are like at capacity.
Maxed out.
At capacity.
On a human level, plus on a work level. Yeah. We are also in the pandemic. So yeah.
There it is. That is true. Right, yes. We're not exempt from these experiences just because we're trained to deal with them. But in all honesty, right, no one was trained to respond to a situation like this. We have not seen this type of turmoil in our lifetime. So we're all learning on the go and becoming flexible. Many of us were not trained to do virtual sessions or phone sessions. Many of us were not trained to provide crisis counseling, right? Much of this, we are seeing clients in crisis. I don't know what else to do, and I don't know where to turn. And for many of us who have not studied that or weren't trained to do crisis intervention, it's been a struggle for a lot of clinicians to handle that.
I also just want to add, I think starting with, if you have insurance, set up that portal, go to the website and just that's how I found mine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I will say too, kind of as Michaiah touched on, with the number of therapists of color being so low and the demand being so high, it may be the case that you could try working with someone who doesn't look like you. I think there's hope in that. My personal therapist is an older white lady, and I personally love it because I think it makes her listen more, right? Because she's like, I'm not thinking of myself or trying to relate, because I have had that experience when I was shopping around and working with clinicians who look like me, who are and kind of filling in the details. Where I'm like, no, that's your life. That's not it. Yeah, but this person is truly you know what I mean? Fully engaged. So I think it can be done. Obviously, it depends. I'm just sharing sort of my experience. But kind of, again, as we spoke about earlier, it comes down to the connection. And I do think you can have connections with anyone if they are culturally humble, right? Able to put themselves aside and do their own research without putting it on you, which is also something my therapist does that I appreciate. She does her own Googling and then comes back and knows more. And I'm like, thank you. Because I don't want to waste time talking about that. Yeah. So there is hope sort of regardless, but also wait lists are real. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. But thank you. You bring up such an important point, and I want to highlight that some more, that finding a good fit doesn't mean that you are going to be 100% compatible, right? You're not going to be the same. It doesn't mean that you're going to feel like it's your best friend, right? Because
they're not your friend. Yeah.
A large part of the therapeutic relationship is going to be when you are challenged, So it's not always going to feel good, right? We're not suggesting that you look for someone who you will never be challenged by or who you will never be uncomfortable with, right? If we're asking the right questions and presenting you with the right homework assignments and having the right discussions, you will be very uncomfortable at times. So finding the right fit doesn't mean comfort. Right. And one of the most dynamic clinicians that I was able to be in the client seat with, I didn't like her at all. I did not get along with her. She was much younger than me. She was also Caucasian. She had no idea, like, my experience, my beliefs, right? She was cool. She was a nice person, but I was highly challenged by her. She presented me with the perspective that I had not yet considered, and that in that point in my personal life, I was not ready to face. So I was highly combative, right? And I was resistant, because quite often we are resistant to change. So I hated her. In those moments, I did not like her. I stayed with her for 8 sessions because my insurance covered it, and it was mandatory for me to be able to start my internship. However, today, right, when I deal with clients, some of the questions that she asked me are questions that are my go-to questions. They are the most powerful questions that I've been able to put in my arsenal. So I appreciate her, right? And that might happen too, where you don't feel an immediate connection, or you don't feel like you're compatible or like you're the same, but the work can still be done. And that is the most important piece, that you are challenged to grow and to heal. And you have safety in doing that.
Absolutely. This is actually a wonderful segue into our next question. Is and this comes, and I feel this question, even though I don't know if this person is a person of color, I want to kind of note that this is something that communities of colors feel like, and it's something we mentioned earlier. You mentioned earlier, Michaiah, about the kind of fundamental distrust of communities of color when it comes to the medical kind of industry. And it's advice when you've never vibed with a therapist. I've tried over a dozen therapists. I suspect I have trust issues that keep me from vibing with therapists. And like, that's in the forefront of my mind. I thought about how like a lot of communities have a hard time kind of getting into the industry, as well as quote unquote vibing. And so I wanted to know if you had any answers about that.
Could you hit me with the question one more time?
Yes, sorry. What is your advice when you've never vibed with a therapist? Like the connection wasn't there. This person has tried over a dozen times with different therapists, and it just seems like they have trust issues that keep them from vibing with therapists. There seems to be just this barrier.
I have some thoughts.
Please.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you can, it feels like you're already thinking about it, but kind of taking some time to really sit with like, what was it? Like if there was a theme or a thread there, right? Maybe it was the location or that initial session, like some of the questions that they asked or something, right? Like kind of doing the work for yourself to be like, what specifically is not working with me or like making me feel some type of way. I think the other thing too is if you do try again, like you can lead with that and be like, I have trouble trusting, right? And I have not, the past 12 therapists have not been a fit. So I just want to like lead with that. And maybe I need more this or I need more that. Like you can assert what you need from the jump. The other thing too is like, don't force it. Don't force it. If it ain't working, it ain't working. That's okay. Therapy's not the end all be all. Lots of people without therapy have wonderful, meaningful, like growing lives. So don't force it if it ain't working. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. It might not be the time, right? If there is a lot of resistance, it might not be the time to explore those things or to build a therapeutic rapport with someone. And that's okay, right? That's okay. But the journey doesn't have to stop with not finding a therapist. Right? So there are, guided journals, there are workbooks, there are,
YouTube, social media,
right? Social media. There are group therapy sessions, support groups. There's spiritual advisement, right? So having some kind of connection to an idea that is larger than yourself, right? I'm not necessarily speaking to organized religion, although that does help some folks as well. A lot of research has been shown for that to be really successful if that's your gig, right? But there are so many other paths to healing, right? There's art,
meditation,
art,
yoga,
music, right? Expression, movement, theater,
dance.
yes.
Yes.
Dance. There are so many ways to express yourself and to look inward, to be able to figure out what's going on with me, right? The reflection piece is super important, and that can be done outside of the therapeutic office, right? There's so many other methods to help yourself to heal.
And maybe doing some of those things like 5 years later, you'd be like, now I'm ready to talk with a therapist.
Yeah.
10 years later, or 20 years, or never.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We have one last question that I'm excited about that'll help us wrap this all up. First, I want to say thank you before everyone gets off the call. But before I ask that question, I also wanted to mention that referrals are your best friend. Like if working with, if you don't feel like the vibe is right with whoever you're seeing, don't be afraid to ask for a referral from them, from a PCP. Like usually people within mental health capacities have those referrals on hand just in case, because like Michaiah and Lesley mentioned, that they know that they're not everyone's, it's not a one relationship. And so sometimes they'll have some referrals for you, that they think might be helpful. So like, don't be afraid to jump from therapist to therapist, because I definitely did that for a little bit as well. And before I even got the therapist that I have right now, I spent a lot of time on social media following different therapists, because now a lot of therapists are on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. And don't be afraid to reach out and be like, are you taking clients? Can we have a quick 30-minute consultation? Like, that's also one way that's super accessible right now that nobody's talking about. And honestly, insurance isn't ready for, but that's a different.
Insurance is true. Or do they know someone? Or if they aren't taking people, do they know someone?
Yes, as well. And if they're not taking people, do they know someone? Referrals are your best friends. Referral. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The last question is, knowing that our BIPOC students report accessing mental health services at a lower rate than white students, I've been thinking a lot about a faith-based approach to support students, particularly our students of color. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, absolutely, right? There's research that suggests, and I think we just touched on this very briefly, but there is research that suggests that having that spiritual integration is going to, especially with communities of color, if you tap into spiritual beliefs, particularly what I've been trained in is in the Christian faith, right? When you incorporate biblical principles or those values, it's really in just getting to the core of my moral compass, right? Like, what do I believe and what's important to me? When we tap into that as clinicians, we validate their experience, we validate their beliefs, there's a deeper connection, and there's a higher level of investment, right? We got to have buy-in from our clients. So yes, if you're offering that as an additional layer of the clinical experience, then absolutely it can work. And so many biblical principles are mirrored in a lot of like Carl Jung's philosophies, right? Are mirrored. And I don't want to go like so far into like theoretical perspectives, but I did attend a Christian college for my master's degree. So spiritual formation, disciplines, and integration was a large part of my education for clients that want that. So research does suggest that that is highly successful, because it's like the gateway. It's a way to get people engaged, and you can meet them where they're at, which is going to work whether that's spiritual or not, right? Meet people where they are, tap into their value system, honor that, validate that, and allow that to be the gateway that allows them to be vulnerable.
I love they brought up the theoretical perspectives, right? Acceptance Commitment Therapy Act. It's like, is that just repackaged Buddhism? It kind of is, but
it definitely is.
It definitely is.
And that's a problem too. I'm sorry.
A whole other door.
We repackage these theories from a Eurocentric perspective that have existed way
in other
before psychotherapy existed, and we, okay.
It is what it is, but. The other thing is Google pastoral counseling. That's a whole field, and it's been going on for a long time. Pastoral counseling. Totally, if it's the fit for the client, like, can totally wonders. So.
Right. And just with that, just be careful, because pastoral counseling, it does have that spiritual component, but it's lacking the clinical component. So unless someone has trained to do both, there are limitations, right? Just like with a coach. Right? With the mental health informed coach, a relationship coach, there are limitations because they are not familiar with diagnoses, right? And with symptoms and how it presents and the manifestations of different issues. So although other methods are great, and I highly recommend engaging in multiple methods of healing, just know where the limitations are, at least legally, ethically, knowing where the boundaries are and when it's time to refer to a higher level of care.
Yeah.
Right. So something that I highly suggest is getting either getting trained with the the mental health first aid, right? Free training. Get that for yourself, for your staff, right? So that you can start to identify some of the presenting symptoms of the most common diagnoses and how it might present in the workplace, right? Really empower yourself to know those things for yourself. So it comes in handy with your personal life and within like the professional world.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to do any helping, take care of yourself because it's hard work. Take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
Let's
And friends, I'm going to leave it up to you. I have one last, speaking of staff and faculty, I have one last question, but if we're tapped out, I'm ready to like back up. I just wanted to ask you if we can do one last quick question.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I think it's important and we don't talk about it because in higher ed, we often focus on students and forget completely about faculty and staff. So I wanted to ask this question, right? Can you speak to the connections between chronic trauma, gaslighting, and lived experiences of people with diverse and intersecting identities in the workplace? Especially when it comes to, managerial and supervisor roles and things like that, where that can happen. And it might not even necessarily be diverse identities, just workplace interactions as a whole, especially, I feel like those interactions are the ones where forget marriage counseling. I feel like manager and managee
power differential.
Power dynamics deserve therapy as well, So,
right. And I mean, the way trauma is processed in your body, like your body codes everything about that sort of differently so that you're very sensitive to anything that might even remind you a little bit of that time, right? So you're especially sensitive to dynamics, familiar or dynamics or not, traumatic, familiar dynamics, right? So definitely there are ways that those things interact. And I think the more that you know this for yourself and the trust, because essentially it comes down to do you trust your workplace? Do you trust your supervisor, whoever it is, to be able to communicate and say this is what I need to feel safe, or else I'm gonna my body's gonna lose control in this thing that is reminding me of something else, right? So
absolutely.
And with PTSD as a diagnosis is something that you are actually allowed to get accommodations through HR. So that also keep that in mind. If you get that paperwork, you can get different accommodations, and I've written those before. So yeah, those are a couple thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely agree that the informing yourself, right? Just being armed with information is always going to help. So knowing the resources that are available to you, making sure that you're insulating yourself, right? Through therapeutic care, through self-care, through self-compassion, through self-awareness, right? To really build yourself up and establish a firm foundation of wellness in your own life. So whether that includes daily routines or just the weekly maintenance or being disciplined in honoring yourself.
Habits. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's going to be extremely important. But if anyone on the line is in a supervisory position and a managerial position, there are things that you can do to create a sense of harmony in the workplace, to create. And what we're finding through recent research is that validation is actually something that really works, right? Finding someone's strength in the workplace as opposed to finding what their weaknesses are and where they're falling short. So if you are in a supervisory position, try that out, right? And that's going to help you to create a more dynamic team and increase the outcomes that you're looking for as well. If you're validating, if you're identifying what are my staff members good at, let me put them in a position that is going to highlight those strengths. Let me pair them with people. Let's say if you have a visionary paired with someone who executes, that's going to lead to some amazing outcomes, right? So look at people's strengths as opposed to being dismissive, as opposed to leading with punishment or leading with this criticism. It's not constructive. It's the same for school. It's the same in a relationship, right? The praise and the affirmations founded in truth, and it has to be relevant, right? And honest feedback, but find the strengths, validate and pair up people that make sense together so that you could get these tasks accomplished. Furthermore, you can set up some meetings that are not focused on an outcome, right? So do
Mhm.
trainings, do mental health trainings, do team building, bring in a professional who's going to figure out, do personality assessments and figure out what these vocational strengths are of your staff, right? And really begin to work these things out in a way that makes sense so that everyone feels seen and supported and that you get to the outcomes you need, because there is a bottom line at the end of this, right? So we have to be able to really show up for our staff and provide an atmosphere of safety, make sure people know their strengths, they're able to function in that, and then there's so much more buy-in when they feel like they're a celebrated and appreciated part of the mission and vision of what you do every single day.
Their strengths are being noticed, right?
Yes. And used. When we're beating people down, there's not going to be this sense of, oh man, I suck so bad, I'm going to work harder. That doesn't usually work, right?
It's never worked. It's never worked.
Make it make sense. It does not, right? So if it doesn't make sense, don't do it. And the CDC actually has like some really good methods of like how to improve work culture, especially now when people are really struggling. So I would, admonish you to go on Google, search like CDC articles about mental health in the workplace. They have some excellent recommendations, everything from providing incentives, like subscriptions to magazines or apps, wellness apps, making sure you're providing employee assistance programs for folks who want therapeutic services, right? And
incorporating
of course,
mindfulness, breathing, these sort of things.
Come on, these things. And this is from the CDC, folks. Like they have recommendations. So we can actually do something to directly impact the wellness of our staff almost immediately and with very little effort.
It's not that hard.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Lesley and Michaiah. This was the dynamic duo. This was amazing. I know that so many people who came on the call got so much information. So I just want to say thank you from the deep part of my heart. Michaiah, is it possible? Are you willing to share like your social media for people to follow you? Of course. All right. So once I get that from Michaiah, I'll send it out to the list that was here today so that you can follow Michaiah. And once you follow Michaiah, like the smart algorithms from like Facebook, and Instagram and so TikTok, they'll be like, oh,
they'll suggest.
Exactly. And they'll suggest. So like that's an excellent place to start, especially when thinking about your mental health. But anyway, thank you both so much. I hope you and everyone on the call have a wonderful day and that you'll meet us back here next month.
Thank you so much.
Bye.